Good evening. And thank you for being here on this rainy summer evening. It's nice to see so many people come out. I'm Rosemary McGee, and I serve as the director of the Stuart A. Rose Manuscript Archives and Rare Book Library. It's my special pleasure to welcome you here this evening on behalf of myself and Yolanda Cooper, who is university librarian, who is here in the back. Please, Yolanda. Thank you. And also on behalf of the organizers and planners who pulled this together and our co-sponsors, and I especially want to mention Dr. Jessie Peel, who is a big believer and supporter in what we do and who we are. And Jessie, you're around here someplace. Oh, there you are, right there. So thank you for everything you do. On occasions such as this, I like to share our mission statement. The Stuart A. Rose Manuscript Archives and Rare Book Library collects and connects stories of human experience, promotes access and learning, and offers opportunity for dialogue for all wise hearts who seek knowledge. I think you'll see how this program tonight and this exhibit promote all these dimensions of our mission statement. Tonight we have the opportunity to hear some very meaningful, if difficult, stories, and to understand the portraits of a particular moment in time that still shapes our world today. Leading this evening's conversation will be Randy Gue, curator of modern political and historical collections. Beyond the traditional focus of that role, Randy has steadily expanded materials into areas that document the recent history of the South and Atlanta, showing how these intersect with larger national and international currents and concerns. As such, we have many collections that tell the story of AIDS, HIV from a unique perspective with an array of multimedia materials. It is particularly fitting that Billy Howard's photographs from Epitaphs for the Living are now here at the Rose Library and at Emory. I first came to know Billy when he was a university photographer back in the 80s. In fact, Billy doesn't know this, but I have a photograph in my home of at Emory at the Zoo Day where he shot a photograph of myself and my husband and our young son, and it still remains one of my favorite photographs. So I've known him since then and followed his career and have the pleasure of bumping into him in a wide range of places that celebrate the arts and all that we believe in. He is highly regarded as someone who tells stories through a particular lens, one of both images and words. And we are gratified that Emory is a place that will continue to be a home for him and for his breathtakingly deep, stark, and poignant work. Thank you, Billy, for that and for trusting and believing in us. I'll now turn the program over to my colleague, Randy Gue, and the conversation will proceed. Again, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Rosemary. Good evening. How y'all doing? Great. Thanks for coming out this evening. It's a pleasure to have you here. We're here to celebrate, to mark the opening of Billy Howard's Epitaphs for the Living, Words and Images in the Time of AIDS. I'm Randy, as Rosemary mentioned. I will be your host, your cruise director this evening. What we're going to do, I'm going to talk for just a couple of minutes. Then I'm going to introduce our distinguished guest. We'll talk for about 45, 50 minutes. Then you'll have 10 minutes to grill our distinguished guest. After that, we'll end kind of the formal program tonight, but we'll break up and informally can continue the conversation here in the room and then out in the hallway with the exhibit. How does that sound? Great. All right. So how many of y'all have never been to the Woodruff Library before? Excellent. Did y'all sign up for our mailing list so you can see other fantastic things that we do? Welcome. One of the questions you may have is, why is the library hosting a photography exhibit? Why is the library hosting an exhibition about HIV and AIDS? And I want to quickly answer those questions. One of the areas, as Rosemary mentioned, that the Rose Library, which is the part of the library where I work in, is building collections, is materials that document the history, the culture, and the politics of the HIV and AIDS crisis here in Atlanta. So we have the papers of AIDS activists like Dr. Jesse Peel, like Dr. Bruce Garner. We have the records of Positive Impact Health Centers, Aid Atlanta. We even have the records of the Southeast Arts, Media, and Education Project, which was an arts organization that was founded about the time that you were taking these photographs. It was founded in particular to counteract the negative stereotypes of LGBT people in the time of AIDS here in town. So our mission, as Rosemary mentioned at the Rose Library, is to acquire, arrange, describe, preserve, and most importantly, provide public access to materials of lasting historical value. And one of the reasons why we have Billy's photographs is because they have lasting historical value. Why do they have lasting historical value? Because here's a question for you. How do you tell the story of an epidemic? How do you do it? You do it by connecting it with faces, with voices, with images, with individual stories. That's how you tell the story of an epidemic. And so that's one reason why we're so delighted that last year we acquired the Epitaphs for the Living materials. They include the prints, a small selection that you see out there, his negatives, correspondence, printed material, and anything else he had laying around that had to do with this series of materials. And like I said earlier, the most important thing that we do is we provide public access to those materials. We do things like these exhibitions. Because what do librarians do really well? We make connections. So this exhibit shows what we do best, make connections. Thanks to Gretchen Warner. Where's Gretchen? Are you here? Hi, Gretchen. Thanks to Gretchen Warner, who designed this exhibit and also curated the rotunda, the really echoey room that you see there with the condoms in it, right? Do y'all know it? She curated that. Thanks to her and her insistence that the first thing you see when you walk into the rotunda is the AIDS crisis is not over. That section of the exhibit connects the past, which he documented, with the present. Thanks to the subject librarians like Erica, Nick, who else is here, of the Woodruff Library, you can go and look deeper into newspapers, journals, multimedia projects, books that they identified if you want to make those connections and explore more deeply. Thanks for the folks at the Office of Health Promotion. Katie, are you here? Thanks to her, you can find the connections to services both here on campus and in the local community. And thanks to two wonderful epidemiologists in the Rollins School of Public Health. Are y'all here? And with AIDSview, you can connect today's HIV/AIDS crisis with place out there in those amazing maps that we have. So that's what we do. We get materials in, we make connections, and we make connections not just in the Rose Library, but all throughout the library, and we make those materials available. And that's what we're here for, and thank you for coming out. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest this evening, our guest who enjoys shooting lawyers. Billy Howard is an Atlanta-based photographer. He is the author of Epitaphs for the Living, Words and Images in the Time of AIDS, Portrait of Spirit, One Story at a Time, Images and Interviews of People with Disabilities, and Angels and Monsters, A Child's Eye View of Cancer. His photographs are in the permanent collection of the Library of Congress, the High Museum of Art, the Carter Presidential Center, and the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. He is currently a Photo Lucida Critical Mass 50 photographer and works from Epitaphs, who were recently exhibited at the Library of Congress for Pride Month. He's photographed in Africa, Latin America, Europe, India, the Middle East, Asia, for corporations, government agencies, and nonprofits. He travels nationally for a diverse range of clients, And he is currently, and he wanted me to make sure to say that, he is currently Vice President of the Board of Directors of Atlanta Celebrates Photography, an organization that puts on the largest community-based photography festival in the country every October. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming tonight's guest, Billy Howard.
Thank you, man.
Yes. Is your mic on?
Well, that was nice. Thank you all. Thanks for coming out in the rain, too. I know that I told you about the free condoms, and I suspect that helped. I appreciate you all being here.
Thank you for agreeing to be tonight's victim. So before we start getting into epitaphs, there's some questions that I actually don't know the answer to. So these are questions that I want to ask. So how did you get into photography? Did you have an inkling, like when you were a kid, that this is something that you would be doing?
Well,
all these years later?
My dad always had a cool camera. He took terrible photographs, but he always had a cool camera, always had a leather case. And the way that we knew my dad had taken the picture is that he had a talent for getting his finger in front of the lens. So there's always a little smudge, a little sample of DNA right there in the bottom corner of every picture that he took. So I always liked that, and I stole a camera from my brother that was very cool, and I liked it. You know, it was something fun to do. I think one of my first pictures that I took was of the bellman at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, D.C., that when I was like 10 years old, and we were staying there. But then in high school, we had a little 2-week break where we could do whatever we wanted, do a different kind of a class, and it was like a mini-mester. And one of my classmates' fathers was a photographer, and he taught, and he came in and set up a dark room, and I printed my first print. And I got excited about it then. Then when I went to college, I was looking around for something to do with my time, and I had a camera, so I started taking pictures, and I found the dark room. And Kim McRae, sitting here, was in the dark room all the time, and she taught me how to really print and really work in the dark room. So it's exciting to see her. But I never thought I'd be able to make a living doing photography. I was an English major, and I started writing for a newspaper, and realized pretty soon that I was never going to be able to make a living writing for a newspaper. But the photographers were having more fun. They'd zip in and they'd take a picture and they'd be gone, and I'd be sitting there with all these notes that I would have to figure out how to write a story with. So it was a bad enough newspaper that when I told them I wanted to be a photographer without seeing a picture that I had taken, they said it was okay, and they switched me over to photography. And I think I lived up to their expectations. So that's kind of the short story of how I got into it. And after leaving the paper, I went to Georgia Tech to start their marketing photography department. They gave me a budget of $600 for half a year to set up the lab, the dark room, get a camera, all that. So I told them that wasn't going to work, but the budget didn't get that much better. And then I got offered a job at Emory, and I came here for 10 years.
So what were you doing? I know I processed Robert W. Woodruff's papers, and there's a very famous photo of Mr. Woodruff with President Leigh next to him. Mr. Woodruff kissing the hand of one of the early Woodruff scholars.
The first.
And I'm shocked to learn that you were the one who took that photograph, right?
Yeah, I did. That was that was an exciting. Well, I spent Emory Magazine followed those 12 first Woodruff scholars around for a year. So I got to know them pretty well over the course of the year. And when they met Robert Woodruff, of course, he had a bowl with ice and Coke, the good Cokes, the small bottle Cokes in it. And so he's got a Coke in front of him, and he's got an ever-present cigar. And the Southern gentleman that he was, when one of the scholars came up, he kissed her hand like a princess, and that was a fun shot for me. It was fun to be there.
So what kind of stuff? I mean, is that the kind of stuff that you were doing here?
But when I worked at Emory, they probably have more now, but they had 9 magazines, and so I shot for the Emory Medicine, and the law school had a magazine, and there was a regular Emory magazine. I worked with a group of talented writers and editors and art directors, my favorite kind of people. So Peta Westmoss is here, and she is some of the best pieces that I did were designed by Peta Westmoss, and she had some great ideas for me. But brochures, and then we'd shoot events and all of that. But Emory was like a microcosm of the world. I mean, there were some of the brightest people in the world working in this small campus, and I, I had access to them and could take their photographs. So it was an exciting time. I got to photograph people that came onto the campus, like maybe the favorite of those was when Desmond Tutu spoke at Glen Memorial Church. I set up a studio downstairs with Peta for a project that she was doing for an annual report, and photographed Desmond Tutu, and it's one of my favorite moments and one of my favorite pictures. And I got a picture with Peta with Desmond Tutu. So if you want designers to really like you when you have those opportunities, it's really good to do that kind of thing. So those are some of the things that I did as a photographer here.
So you're working at Emory, 1987. He started this project in 1987. Like, what led you to it?
Well, it was in the 80s, in the early 80s, I had a dentist that had become a friend. He was hilarious. He was about my age, and he was flaming. I mean, he was really funny. He had the best sense of humor, and I would go, and he would tell me these terrible jokes. And so then I felt it incumbent upon myself to always have terrible jokes when I came. And we would spend the first few minutes of every dental, every time I had a tooth cleaning, we would, and actually I had them all clean, not just a tooth, but, but we would tell each other the worst possible jokes, and it was like a challenge to be worse. And one time I remember going in, and I'm sitting in the dentist chair, and the dentist, Neil, and his assistant jumped in, and they had those little dealy bopper things and they started making noises, and and I'm thinking, this guy's going to get into my mouth with a drill, and I don't know about this, but I loved him, and he was a part of my life. So I got a letter shortly in 1986 saying that he was leaving his practice and recommending another dentist for us all to go see, and that was it. And it didn't make sense to me because he was my age. I was in my early mid-30s at the time, and so I wanted to find out what was happening. So I tried to call his dental assistant, and I finally tracked her down, and she wouldn't really say. She said that he wasn't doing well, and that he had moved to Florida and he was living with his mom. And I got that address and I kind of knew what it was. I mean, that was 1986. AIDS was a big story, and I kind of felt like I knew what it was. But I wrote him, I didn't say anything about that, but I told him that I wanted to reach out to him and let him know that I cared about him and see if there was anything I could do for him. And I never heard anything back until I got a letter from a friend of his telling me that Neil had died, and that he had died of AIDS, and that when this friend was going through his belongings, he found my letter, and he just wanted to let me know. And so that confirmed it, and it was devastating. And it was this thing that I realized the stigma of AIDS, which was horrific at the time. It still isn't great, but it's better. Kept him from being able to reach out to the people that cared about him most. And I think the added pressure from him of being a doctor, dealing with people that are bleeding and all of that, I'm sure that he was terrified that his patients would reject him and be angry with him and who knows what. But I found that to be a tragedy, and so I was looking around for a way to respond to that.
And so, do you want to go to the slides? You end up with a photo. Tell us about this photograph.
Well, I'll start here. This is Ron. this is one of the reasons that Emory is such an amazingly appropriate place for all of these to end up. I'll tell you that I told everybody that I photographed that I would get their words out any way I could for as long as I possibly could. And when Randy decided to acquire all of this material for Emory, it just felt like it was coming home. I had an assignment for one of the Emory magazines to photograph the AIDS ward at Grady Memorial Hospital. And I went there, and I was taking pictures, and Ron was there for an appointment. And so I reached out and I shook his hand. And later he told me that that moment was where he said he would have done anything that I suggested, because people weren't touching people that were HIV positive or had AIDS, and he said that immediately made him trust me. So that was a powerful thing for me. But I was there to shoot something else, but I saw Ron, and we just kind of hit it off. We started talking. I was asking him questions about what he was going through, and I said, well, would you be willing to let me take another photograph of you sometime, not for this project, but for something else? And it sort of all gelled in that one conversation. And Ron said he would be glad to. We arranged a time when I could meet him at the rooming house that he was staying in. And so at the time, there are a couple of people that have influenced me. One is Dwayne Michaels, who has written, takes images and writes stories and things underneath the images, and I've always loved those. But then Marilyn Suriani, who's also here, was working on a project photographing exotic dancers for a book that eventually came out called Dancing Naked in the Material World. And she was having them write statements under the images. And I just loved that collaborative idea, that it wasn't just, it was something that you and the subject did together. It wasn't all about my image, and it wasn't all about their words, but it was about the combination and how they told a story. And so I suggested to Ron that we do this, and I took his photograph and gave him the print with the bottom half blank, and he wrote his statement underneath it. And I'm going to read it to you because this is how it started, and I thought that it was really powerful. He said, "The nights are the hardest. Sometimes I'm afraid to go to sleep, afraid that I may not wake up. Going to my support group has helped me. I can talk more openly about my illness now, but I still have fears. I'm afraid I may die all alone. What's more frightening is that no one will care." Well, that statement just blew me away, and it became more poignant later when, after I'd taken about 6 or 8 photographs, the Atlanta Journal did a feature story on my project. Keith Graham wrote an essay on it, and they ran several pictures, but the front page of that section was the picture of Ron with his statement. Well, Ron also, interestingly, was living the same kind of life that Neil Franklin did. Ron had been a hospital administrator in Clayton County, and when he found out that he was sick, he left without telling anybody. Because he too, I'm going to try to get through this, because he too was afraid that all of his friends and all of his colleagues would reject him, and he couldn't take it. He'd already lost so much. And so he was living alone in this rooming house in Atlanta and expecting to die all alone. Well, the paper came out, and some of his friends at the hospital saw it, and they got in touch with me. And they asked me if I could put them in touch with Ron, and I said, well, I'll ask Ron. And so I asked Ron, and he said that would be okay. And then, so they got together with Ron, and this group from his hospital became his caretakers until he died. And so his greatest fear did not pass that way. He was surrounded by people that loved him. If nothing else had happened with what I was doing. That would have been, and is still, maybe the most powerful moment in my life and career as a photographer. And I promise I'm going to gather myself up here. But through this process with Randy and with Emory, I've been digging back into these files and remembering these stories and these people, and there were so many poignant moments and so many moments of friendship like this that happened very quickly. One of the people I photographed, Roy Griffin, actually this is George Kish. He was diagnosed with gay-related immune deficiency before AIDS even had a name. And I photographed him, and after about a month, I got together with him and I said, George, I feel like I've known you all my life. And George told me his words, it's because we don't let any bullshit in. It's either all or nothing. If we decide we trust you, you're all in. You're like our family. And if we don't trust you, you don't get anything. And so George was telling me that I was accepted as family, and that's how all of them were. It was once they let you in, you were all in. And I've never had an experience like that, quite like that before, because I felt deeply about every one of the people that I photographed, and it happened very quickly. So that's my rambling answer to your question, and that's wrong.
Well, hang on.
Okay, all right.
Set
all
that
right.
down. So,
They said yeah.
let's talk about kind of the aesthetics for a moment, because they do all have kind of a similar look. Natural, I mean, did you go into it with, how did you come up with what ended up being this is the first one, with what ended up being the style of the photographs?
The way that I like to take a photograph is the first thing I look at is what is the light in the scene? What is the light that's already there? And I want to add as little to it as I have to get the picture that I want. Well, this was kind of a dark space. So I actually do have one flash, just a little handheld flash that's on a stand in the corner that's lighting that side of Ron's face and the rest of the room. But when I meet somebody, and a lot of these people I met at their homes or rooming houses or wherever they were, the first thing I look around for is what is something about this space that might connect to that person? What are the talismans of that person's life? Or is there anything that would be in the photograph that would tell you a little bit more about the person that I'm photographing? And Ron had basically run out of money. I mean, the insurance runs out pretty quickly, and especially back in those days. And so he had been a hospital administrator, but now what he could afford was this single room in this house in Atlanta. And there's a starkness to it, and I think I caught that. He's got books on a chair behind him, and so that gives you a little bit of information about him. Those are important. He didn't have much in there, so the things that he did have were meaningful. And I'm just looking to try to enhance the photograph with something meaningful about them, and sometimes that's what they're surrounded with, and sometimes, quite frankly, it's just their face and their expression.
All right, well, and that takes us to James. Tell us about James.
Well, I'm going to read what he said too, because I think what my promise to them was to get their words to as many people as possible. So you're part of a gift to me and to James. Give me courage. I'm afraid to die alone. Well, we've heard that before. Give me strength to accept the concessions I must make in daily living. Give me hope that I may share it with others. Let me become the person I have always wanted to be. Let me love myself. James Leigh III. Everybody in the book I don't have a name for, and I didn't name unless they wrote their name on the picture. If they wanted to be anonymous, they're anonymous, and I didn't edit or tell anybody anything about what they were going to say. I said, if you write it and you want to be in the book, you're in the book, and so that's the way we progress. James, I gave him his picture, and I waited a few weeks and I called him and he said, yeah, I'm going to do it, but I haven't figured it out yet. And I I gave him some more time and I called him again. I kept in touch with him. We kept talking. He always would say, yeah, I'm going to do it. I want to do it. And, I think I've got some ideas. And that went on for a year. He was one of the early people that I photographed. It went on for a year. And finally, James got me the picture back. He called me and said, I've done it. I've got it. And he told me that the reason that it took so long was that he felt like he was writing his will. And that's where the title of the book came from. I thought, well, it's like an epitaph for James. And yet I'd met all of these people that were, it was a pretty devastatingly terminal diagnosis back then. Some people survived, and not many did that I photographed. But they were all continuing with their lives. One of the people I photographed in DC, Peter, you'll see the letter out in the case from Peter, terminally ill, is excited because he's just started graduate school. And that's why I thought living with AIDS, they're not dying of AIDS. They weren't dying, although most of them did. And some of them even, it was a wide gamut of emotions, and some people were just tremendously afraid of death. But others were looking as much as possible to find ways to continue living and contributing. There were several people that I photographed that one person said that he told me for the first time in his life, he felt like his life had purpose because he had started volunteering for an AIDS support group where when new people were finding out that they were HIV positive, he would go and talk to them and help guide them through what they were going through, help get them to support groups and help them out. He said he had never felt like he had a purpose before. And he was sincere. And it was just a kind of profound thing for me to hear that from somebody. Again, most of these people were around my age. Some of them were younger, some of them were a little bit older. But it was killing them. By the time I finished the photographs and we took the book to press, 15 of the people I photographed had died. I went to every memorial service that I could attend. And by the time the book came out, 18 had died. And it was after the book came out that I went through the most difficult time because while I was taking the photographs, there was always somebody new. I would lose somebody, but there'd be two more people that I'd be excited about meeting and photographing and listening and hearing their stories. But after the book went to press, that was it. All of a sudden, people were dying, and I knew I was losing them. So that's James.
Well, and that's kind of a good transition. How did you meet these people? Did you contact them? How did people end up being a part of the project?
Well, that was kind of a difficult thing at the beginning because of the stigma. I didn't want to feel like I had coerced one person into doing something that they might regret. So after Ron, it was a word of mouth kind of thing through Atlanta, and they take their picture to their support group. Somebody else would call me. They would either get my name from the person and my number, or they would allow me to call them. But it was always their decision first. And then when I was about halfway through with the project and Southern Methodist University Press decided to publish it, they wanted a more national view. And Delta Airlines, I will give a shout out to them because they agreed to fly me anywhere in the country I wanted to go to be able to get that voice, and they did that for free. So I did a lot of couch surfing and staying on with friends in apartments in Washington and New York and Chicago and San Francisco and North Carolina, and Delta flew me everywhere. And before I would go, the way I worked out the system was I would find the AIDS support groups in that town, and I would take mimeographed copies of some of the images that I had done, full size, and I would send it to those support groups and say, I'm going to be in New York this week, And if there's anybody in your group that might be interested in participating in this, let me know, and we'll set up appointments and I'll take their photographs. And everywhere I went, there'd be between 5 and 10 people that wanted to participate, and I'd set up appointments and I'd go see them and take their photographs. But I never had to reach out to anybody. And in Atlanta, there was a fundraiser called Heartstrings that David Shepard put together, and David Shepard and I got together, and he decided to use I think I only had 8 photographs at the time, and it was like a full-scale entertainment kind of show, lots of different things happening, but one of the things he ran throughout it was he would project the photograph that I'd taken and have an actor come out and read that person's statement, and that went throughout the show. But what David did was, in all of the programs, he put in a statement about what the project was I was working on and my contact information. And that's when it really started to kind of take off. And that the Heartstrings program is in the collection
We
that
have it
Randy
in the
has.
collection. Yep.
So that's how I went about that.
And that's kind of speaking about your technique. Tell us about this photograph, because it's stark.
Well, I'll read this. When I saw this picture, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I saw the solitude of this disease and realized how most of us are left to deal with it alone. Maybe that's out of fear, ours and other people's, but it just feels so lonely sometimes. From this, I see the only way for things to change is to make ourselves a vital part of the world, so understanding of this illness will increase and the fear will diminish. Well, I walked into his apartment, and like I said, the first thing I'm looking for is, okay, what is it that says something about this person? And I go into his apartment, and I'm like, oh, I don't know. I don't know what I can do here. There's nothing that's really speaking to me. And then it hit me that it's the nothingness here that is the story. This is what says something about his condition. And so I took a picture that showed him surrounded by this basically barren apartment. And the feeling that I had and that I thought I had communicated in the picture obviously resonated with him. He saw it too. That's that. That's how that works.
Well, it's a remarkable story, and then it's kind of related to the next slide too, right?
Exactly. Well, I went into, this is Marquis, who said, I'm a person with AIDS. More importantly, I'm an African-American homosexual with AIDS. 3 crosses to bear. Before I can deal with the disease, I have to deal with the racism and the homophobia. One day, people will not judge a person by the color of their skin, their sex, or their sexual preference, but by the content of their character. I hope that day is almost here. Well, I'm sorry to say I think Marquis would be a little disappointed, but I think things have gotten better on some levels. And when I walked into Marquis, it was the same kind of thing. I wasn't really seeing anything, but I was so struck with his face. He was so powerful, and he had such intense expressions, and then I realized that was where the story of Marquis was. It was in his face. And so I just concentrated on that. It was just natural light coming in through a window, and he just had a powerful persona, and I wanted to capture that. He had it was obviously sad, but he also was a very strong individual.
So when you go into places like his place, how many shots would you take? And would you shoot a couple rolls of film? What would you do?
I think I figured it out once that I averaged about 3 or 4 rolls of film for everybody I photographed. So 32 frames, shooting, and I'll look through my negatives and I'll see that like one whole roll, it looks exactly the same, and every picture looks the same. But I know and knew that it wasn't true. There's one picture when you're shooting somebody that is different than the rest. It's this flicker or something happening in the eyes. It's usually the eyes. I mean, I'm just like mesmerized by people's eyes. And One image would almost always kind of come up to the top and be the one that I wanted to print. And I didn't give the subjects, the collaborators, an option. I would print the picture that I liked the most. But I always went to them and told them that if they didn't like that image, if they wanted something else, I did the same thing with the 900 lawyers that I photographed for Jeff Cordell here for Austin and Bird. But I told them if they wanted another image, that I would give them another image. Nobody asked for a different image. They all liked the image that I had chosen. And I think I kind of had gotten to know them a little bit during the time we were photographing each other, and I was talking to them, and they knew where they were being photographed. And so we had already built up a trust and a bond, and I think that that I had read them correctly for that.
So about how long would it take you to shoot 3 or 4 rolls of film? You're talking an hour?
Sometimes
or,
I would spend a couple of hours
doing it?
with somebody, and sometimes I would spend half a day with somebody. It kind of depended, and some of the people I just connected to, there was a guy in Chicago, Patrick, who was just, I mean, he was a beautiful person. He just looked great, and he had this very, like a stevedore's hat, and it was really great. He had a lot of light coming into his apartment, and I spent a half a day with him, and we just talked, and he was a vital person. I mean, healthy, seemingly vital. And he was another person that when it was somebody out of town, I would FedEx them their picture with an envelope that they could then FedEx it back to me, so it was easy for them. And it usually took two weeks to a month to get them back. And I just kept calling Patrick and kept getting his answering machine. And I just never heard back from him until I got a call from somebody who had been checking Patrick's answering machine and told me that he had died 2 weeks after I photographed him. He never had a chance to write on his photograph. His friends wrote a statement on his photograph to be in the book, but this vital person that I had just gotten to know was gone like a light. I don't know whether I don't even remember what your question was, but that was the answer. That was the answer to it.
And guess what? It worked. It worked.
Okay.
Yeah. Good luck with this one.
All right. No, I'm getting better. No, this is Andre Walton, and I met her in San Francisco. And Andre Walton is with me always. The record reads a 46-year-old woman that had a kidney operation, and the blood transfusion contained blood that was tainted with HIV. When the doctors found out, they didn't tell her. They waited a year to tell her. And I'm going to read what she said. I had to make a decision whether I would live with AIDS or die of AIDS, whether to get bitter or better. I chose better. You know, life throws you curveballs every once in a while, and you have good times and bad times. Every single time that I've had something that was really difficult for me, Andre Walton gets me through it. That decision to get bitter or better has changed my life. It's allowed me to forgive every trespass, perceived or otherwise, and it's allowed me to forgive myself. And that's a powerful bit of medicine. And Andre discovered that, and she passed that down to me. And I know a lot of people that go through situations where there's a lot of pain and anger. And that's legitimate for a lot of things. But at a point, it is a very powerful thing personally to be able to truly, honestly let it go, to forgive them, and just as importantly, to forgive yourself. So that's Andre.
This one's going to be rough on everybody.
That's Baby T was born in a hospital she never left. She was born at Grady, and I knew that I couldn't ask Baby T to give me permission to put her photograph in the book, so I just chose to take her photograph in a way that she was not recognizable. I also knew that emotionally, I mean, as you can tell, I don't think I could have taken too many more pictures of children or babies. It was hard. So I let Baby T speak for all of them. And I was trying to figure out how she could tell her story, how she could make her statement. And I thought about these footprints and handprints that they do with babies, and I asked the doctor if we could do that. And he said that we could, and he brought up an ink pad. I came back with a photograph. And he helped me, and I put her handprint on the photograph. And I felt bad because I was saying, you know, I don't want to bother this child. And he said, no, anytime she's touched is a good thing. So we put her handprint on the thing, and I asked him, what does she need? And he told me that she needed a walk in the park. And 2 weeks later also, she died.
How many frames did you take of this?
I took several. I took one picture, I should have put in here. I walked into the room, and it was this big hospital room with a crib with Baby T in it, and then a large space and a television. And I have this photograph where you see the television in the corner, and there's a Pampers commercial. Televisions are weird to me. They're like channeling something to me. But there was a television commercial, a Pampers commercial. So there was this perfect mother with her child, her perfect child, filling the screen, and this abandoned Baby T in the corner. So there's some more negatives. I mean, you have all the negatives.
We do.
We
do.
You can see.
I knew the answer to that, but I wanted everyone else to know the answer to that. After Baby T, we have another. Some of the people wanted to be anonymous in the photos. So why did he want to be anonymous in the photo?
Well, D called me. He had heard about the project and said he wanted to say something. He had something to say, but he didn't want his photograph. Could we do this without a photograph? And I said, well, I'm a photographer, and it's a photography project, and it takes both of us to do something. But I'll work with you to come up with a photograph that allows you to remain anonymous, but also gives you the opportunity to make a statement. So what he said was the presence of antibodies. He was HIV positive, not a diagnosis. Fear-ridden insurance companies shun the positive and embrace the worst. Ignorant employers are just that. We wish you knew we were healthy and shall continue with care and divine providence. We wish to be unmasked. However, fear and ignorance prevail. May God bless us, comfort us, and teach us, all of us. So we worked it out to take this picture so that he didn't want to lose his job, he didn't want to lose his insurance. And over time, I lost touch with Dee, and I lost touch with almost everybody. And it was my assumption that everybody was gone. And a few years ago, one of my best friends called me and said, you know, I had lunch with this person today. Your name came up. And he said, oh, I know him. I'm in a book that he did. And it was Dee. His name is Doug Lotus. And he lives in California now, and we've been in touch ever since. I just called him yesterday, and he's very excited about you guys hearing his story. He's embraced his diagnosis. He no longer is afraid of the stigma that goes along with it. He survived long enough to get to the point where the cocktails and the protease inhibitors and all of that, so he's managing his health okay. His claim to fame, and he started this when he was in Atlanta, is GWTW, I see some recognition, GWTW20. So I wish I could even give you a sample, but Doug Lotus in 20 minutes can do the entire Gone with the Wind. And he is every character. He slaps himself, oh, Charlotte. And he's a creative, special person. And when he walked back into my life, it was like seeing a ghost. And he put me back in touch with that time and all of those people. The Smithsonian exhibited work from this collection during their Folk Life Festival a couple of years ago when they flew Doug to Washington to be with me for 3 days while we were there talking to people and sharing our stories. And powerful medicine. So that's a Doug. No longer anonymous.
Yeah. Just with the image on the wall out there.
Dying from AIDS is hard enough. Living with it is even harder. Drew Carroll. You can't tell from the photograph, but Drew is blind. And he's blind because he was mugged and beat up for being gay. So he not only had the terminal disease to deal with, but this debilitating disability that was caused by hate. And I just thought the simplicity of his statement was poignant and powerful. And it was just terrible, sad story for Drew.
One last one.
Elena Trudeau got in touch with me. She wanted her son to be in the book, but her son had already died. And so I photographed Elena with a photograph of her son, and she wrote the conversations that she had with her son over the previous year. And it's a roller coaster of a ride. May 1985. Mother, don't worry, it's just a virus. I'll be okay. I always have and I always will. October 1985. Mom, I was just given the AIDS test today and the results will be ready on the 20th. October 20th, 1985. Mom, the results show that I have AIDS. October 22nd. Mom, I have good news. The doctor says I don't have AIDS. It's only ARC. And ARC was AIDS-related complex. November 1985. You know, Mom, when I get well, there are a lot of things that I will do differently. December 1985. No, Mother, I don't want you to come. Save your money. January 1986. Mom, can you come? I'm scared. February 1986. Mom, I'm coming home. May 1986. Mother, I'm buying a new car this weekend. Didn't want to give up. June 1986. Things are not working out well, Mom. June 13th, 1986. What do you want me to do, my son? Oh, yes, Mom, I want lots and lots of flowers. Ricardo Lara. I'm trying to find Elena Trudeau. I kept in touch with her for a long time. I've been trying to find her. I want her to know what's happening with all this work, and I feel bad that I've lost touch, but 30 years is a long time. So, boy, this is like an upbeat little thing.
You got it.
And I'm so sorry for I don't get this emotional with the lawyers that I've been photographing. Although sometimes a little bit.
I got one more question before we're turning it over to y'all. You've been really articulate about how this project has changed you as a person. One of the things there's a quote about it out there on the wall. One of the things I'm interested in is, did this series change you as a photographer? And I'm ambushing you with this question. You didn't know it was coming.
Well, I think it changed me in about every way that it can change me. It probably sealed into me that desire to know my subject on a level beyond just somebody that I was going to take a photograph of. And it has given me a sense that, you don't have to change the world with a photograph, but you want to take a photograph that honors the person that you're taking a photograph of. I've been a journalist, but I've never been a gotcha photographer where I was trying to capture something that I thought would make a great image, but would not feel right to the person I photographed. So when I photographed Roy Griffin, and his television was on, and all of a sudden a pantyhose commercial came on, and it said regular queen 99 cents, and I said, oh shit. Click. And when I went to Roy's house, I had it in an envelope, and I said, Roy, now you can pick another picture if you don't like this, but this is the one I like.
Do we have?
I think you've got it in there.
There it is.
So I pulled it out, and he laughed, and he said, "Oh, regular queen, I know that's right." And so I'm not sure that it changed me, but it instilled in me an appreciation for my craft and what the potential for it was for both me and the person I was photographing.
Fantastic.
That's my answer.
Fantastic.
That's my final answer.
Well, hang on.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. I will say, just to finish up, that I did tell all of these people, and when I started on it, I wanted it to be a book, and I was telling people it was going to be a book, and I had no idea how it was going to be a book, but I was telling people it was going to be a book, and I was telling people that I was going to get their words out as long as I could, to as many people as I could. So you're helping me fulfill that mission, and Emory has felt like a final home where that will happen from now on when researchers come in and access these files. That by trusting me and sharing their words, I did my part to give them a voice, and that to me is the most powerful thing that I can do as a photographer, and I'm just humbled that I was able to do it for this particular group of people, all of whom have touched me deeply. So
Great. You up for a couple of questions?
sure.
And anybody want to play Stump the Chump? Hang on, we got a question coming down here with the microphone, so that we make sure that we get you on there. So hold on 1 second. Here comes Maya.
Did you just call me a chump?
No, that's just an expression, right?
I'm just curious, are you almost glad that digital photography wasn't around when this project presented itself to you? Because would it have been presenting almost more images and stories than would have been manageable, or would it have been a dream come true, or would it have made any difference at all?
No, it's a good question, because to some degree I'm a different photographer when I'm shooting digital, it's a different place in my mind, I guess. But there's something about the process of developing the film and printing the picture that to me is intimate. You're discovering it through this technical art. And there's a level of excitement of seeing an image that you took a couple of weeks ago that you hope is coming out, that you've since then traveled and tried to protect the film. And so that is a different emotional process than taking a picture, looking at it, showing it to the person. You know, it's a different process for the subject too. They don't know what it's going to look like until they get it. So, and I am glad. I have, although, since digital has happened, I've done projects and still used film when it felt like it was another place where I wanted to go to that space to do it. And so I don't do it very often, but I will do that. And to me, the work that I did on film, it remains the most meaningful work that I've done. And I still try to always have some kind of project going on where I'm collaborating with people, helping people tell their stories, and usually people that are dealing with some health-related issue. That's another thing that AIDS did for my photography career, is I knew that I was interested in people that were going through health crisis, because there's a different focus they have on life that I find to be fascinating and powerful to me personally. And it's powerful for me to be able to tell their story. So I do that still, and I do it with digital, but it doesn't quite feel the same. So I think it would have been a different project if it had been digital at the time. I'm not sure how I would have approached it, but I think I would have done something maybe different.
Another
Good
question?
question. No.
Yeah.
Hey. Yep.
Off screen. What took you to SMU? How did you get those connections?
The question was, how did you get the connections with your
With
your
Southern
publisher?
Methodist University Press. Well, some of you might know Orion Catledge. He was a photographer in town. He did a book called Cabbage Town. And Orion Catledge was legally blind. And he took some of the most fantastic photographs of Cabbage Town back when it was a mill town, basically, that you'll ever see. And Orion was a friend. And he wanted to show his pictures to me one time and see if I would help edit. So I called my friend at the paper, Louis Favorite, over there, and Louis came over, and Orion walked up to the Emory Photographic Services with 2 beat-up vinyl suitcases filled with images, photographs, and they were all brilliant. And so Louis and I were supposed to tell him which were good and which were bad, and we had a big stack of good, and there weren't really any bad. Anyway, University of Texas Press published his book on Cabbage Town in the early 80s, and it was a classic. It's a great book. And so Orion, when I was working on this project, gave me his contact at Texas University Press. Well, she had then, Suzanne Comer, had gone to Southern Methodist University to be an editor for their press. So I sent it to Suzanne. It resonated with her. She was the perfect person to collaborate with in producing this book. And the people at SMU believed in the project, and they decided that they put more money into printing this book than any other book they had done. And because they wanted to honor the people. And so we worked together to get it to come out. They couldn't afford the printing, so we got the Design Industry Foundation for AIDS to help pay for our printing costs, and it was a collaboration, and we all worked really hard to get it out and get it into the people's hands that we photographed. A shout out to Lucinda Bunnan, who is one of, if not the seminal person in photography in Atlanta, for her support. She gave the money to buy a book for every person that I photographed, because SMU couldn't afford to do that either, so we had to figure that out. And so Lucinda did that, always will be in my heart for that.
You've been holding out on me. You didn't tell me about Orion, right? So one more question, and then we'll carry on.
How many editions has this published, and also how many languages is it in?
I think it went through 3 editions. The first run was 3,000, and to tell you the truth, I don't know how many have sold, how many are out there. It was published in Japan. There was a magazine in Japan picked up the story. It got a lot of press at the beginning. It was on CBS This Morning, and that got it a lot of traction. And I did a book tour around the country, and then a publisher in Japan saw it, and they wanted to do the book. So they did what I just love the book that they did. It's a gorgeous. It's in one of the display cases outside. And after they did the book, they invited me to Japan, and I did a 5-city tour. They did an exhibit around
How is it different?
5 cities. It's a different format. It's smaller, and it's in Japanese. Who knew?
Hang on. The smart ass comes out.
Sorry. So the reaction that it got in Japan was really great. It was I made a lot of friends in Japan, and they were really open to the project.
Last thing, but you got to tell that story that you told me the other day.
Well, when I would do a talk, I always had an interpreter, and because my Japanese is rusty, and so I would say something. The interpreter would say it, and then it's weird because we have this immediate interaction here. I say something, and I can tell the reaction, you laugh or whatever, right after I say it, and I go on. But I'd have to wait for them to tell their interpretation of what I said, and then people would respond, and then I would go on. And the other thing was they told me that in Japan, they weren't really going to ask me a question. They would make a statement. So we had a question and answer session like this in every place we went, but it wasn't like a question you would get. They wouldn't say, well, why this or what that. They would make a statement, and then I would have to figure out how to interpret that as a question and make a response to them. So that was fascinating. It was kind of neat. Actually, it worked out better than it sounds like it might. But I will tell you my favorite question. This older Japanese woman stood up in, I think it was in Fukuoka, and she said, "I did not think you were the photographer. I thought you were a movie star." And, all right, I'm big in Japan. And so the interpreter tells me this, and I'm feeling pretty good about this talk. And I said back to her, which takes a minute because of the interpreter, I said, "I have met a lot of people in Japan. You are my favorite." And I got a big hug from her. So
that's a good, laughter is a good place to end. So
there you go.
Please, let's carry on this conversation in this room and out in the hallway. Thank you very much for coming out tonight. And
thank you, Randy. Thank you, Randy. Appreciate it.